No, Susan can't do that. So we didn't do it. She was tempted though. So now, so then we have these other two components which came late to the campaign. We've been developing the case statements for them. And so we asked young adults who had been engaged in that effort during the churchwide assembly, as well as others, lots of these folks, youth and young adults, and we got them together and we said, let's start brainstorming and saying, what do we want to do for this $4 million component? I think right now we're saying $3 million of it will be a kind of endowment to fund other ministries that would be related, and $1 million will go to supporting directly things like the Lutheran Volunteer Corps, Abundant Life Together, ALT, which is a pilot program, and some of these other things where we are already doing ministries with young adults, but they could use some extra infusion of resources to do that. And it's not a very good description because it's just new, that part of the case statement. So that's what we're doing, and then with the disabilities, we decided, well, it was not passed that we were going to have like a separate disabilities ministry. It's what can congregations do to work with persons who are differently able or and enhance the ministries. So we're working with our social service organizations, our agencies, to say what's already in place and how then do we coordinate those and make them more accessible and more visible to congregations to increase the ministry that we do in congregations along with our social ministry agencies for people with disabilities. So that's the campaign. We're now, right now we have, we've raised $32 million so far with a goal toward $198 million. It's a 5-year campaign. It's one of the, an interesting, in some ways very helpful and hopeful things, but kind of, I didn't think we were that bad off, is that we've never had, in the 26-year history of our denomination, we've never had a campaign like that where we went out and sought major gifts of $1 million or more. I mean, colleges do this all the time, and a lot of social service. We've never done that. We've never had the capacity. And now we're also building a database so we can keep track of donors and thank them. There's a novel idea. Thank them for this and keep those folks in the database. And then this builds capacity, not just for us at churchwide, but this, we're working with synods. I'm not sure what you're doing down here, your bishop can talk about.
I'll do that on Thursday morning. Chris Stocks, do you want to make a comment?
We talked a little bit about yesterday before you were able to get here. November 15th, mark your calendars because you're going to hear more about that, and you're supposed to invite people. There's a meeting in Greenville and Columbia and down in Charleston, and so all over that. But you'll be hearing a lot even more than that.
And if you haven't, get your counsel to see the DVD that talks about what's the new thing that God is doing, because it features all the new ministries, and
right.
it features the ELCA campaign appeal as part of what God is doing in the ELCA. So it's a great tool.
And there are prospectuses back there, so if you want to see them,
cool.
You all have them, and I'm sure they're on your desk somewhere. But if you seem to have lost it on your desk, they're not back there.
So, and the point is that we can do, and that's the thing, we can do together, we can do more. But we can do more together than we can apart. So we're building capacity for major gifts. We've already had, I think, 5 individuals give $1 million or more to the campaign. We've never done that before. We've never asked for that before. So it's helping us maybe, it's like, it's wonderful that the story of the prophet Elijah. He goes to this town, and this woman says, you know, my husband, your servant, her husband was in the prophet guild, you know, he's died, we're destitute, the creditors are at the door, I'm going to have to sell my children in slavery. And Elisha says, what do you want me to do for you? And then he says, what do you have in the house? And she says, well, I've got a little bit of oil, and then we're done. It's too bad, it's all over. And then Elisha says to her, go and ask your neighbors for vessels, and not too few. And so she does, and brings them in and fills them up until, you know, the kids keep bringing her pots and jars. And she says, well, give me another one. This is a really rough paraphrase of the Hebrew. And she says, there aren't any more. And then Elisha says, go and sell all that, pay off your debts, and you can live in peace. So that's when Stephen Bowman or Ruben Duran tell that story, they say, we're looking at a couple of things. First of all, that God says, well, what can I do for you through the prophet? You know, do we even think that God wants, you know, we don't believe that. We say it sometimes. Then the prophet says, what do you have in the house? We have this capacity already. We've never, ever exercised it. And then when he tells her to go get these vessels, he says, and not too few. You know, we're like, we'll just ask for a little bit, and maybe that'll be good. No, that's nuts. These people are giving the money to the Salvation Army because the Salvation Army asks for it. So now we're learning to do that. We're learning how to manage and attend those databases and manage those donors. And then we're hoping that this will be a wonderful resource for citizen congregations. And then people are all afraid if they give money to the campaign, then they won't give money to the senator, to the congregation. No, these are people who are generous people, and they are we know, because we've got their giving records now, that they do support a variety of these ministries. They just need to be asked. So that's the campaign. Here and then here and then here. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
You said yesterday that we give on average in the ELCA 1.9%.
Yes.
And we're not a tithing church. Is that why we've reverted to fundraising? Is this a counter to the fact that we can't seem to get our people to practice true stewardship? Or, you know, there's a difficulty in understanding the need to go to fundraising. And the secondary difficulty that folks have, or that some of the folks I serve have, is we have wonderful things that the money is going to go for. Same way in the Senate, we have a fundraising campaign, we have wonderful projects that the money goes for. But the question is, what determines a wonderful project that we have to fundraise for and a wonderful ministry that we do out of mission support?
We want to do both. So yes, we still want to talk about mission support and giving as a spiritual discipline. But the reality is that people don't necessarily give that way. So while we're trying to work with people to say this is good for you, it's liberating for you to give and to support the regular ministries of the church, which the campaign is, that doesn't somehow supplant the work that we already do together as a church, and we're not using that money. We're still doing all the things that we do. We could just do more. The other thing is, there's too much money on the table. So people are generous givers. If they're even tithing, why in their wills should they say, I want this money to go to the Animal Protective League, when we haven't asked them to say, here's a chance to save lives and introduce people to Jesus? You know, why aren't we doing that? And that's, you know, my guess is they were probably tithing in their local congregations in the 1st century. But the saints in Jerusalem needed particular help, and there was a fundraising drive that happened there to support those people in Jerusalem. So it's both. It has to be both. Yeah. Now, who did I say was then you and then you?
Okay, changing things a little bit, and that won't surprise anyone. We talked about AIMS, which is a whole different
Associates in Ministry. I was told never to call those
okay,
sisters and brothers AIMS.
We say WELCA too. So,
Okay.
There's another stepchild in the ELCA, and that's chaplains. We recently got a mailing about all the ministries that the ELCA does. I don't remember what it was called. You don't get them. I don't think. No. It did not include the ministry that I do.
What is your ministry?
I serve Lutheran Homes of South Carolina. I'm chaplain at the Heritage at Lowman.
Right.
And, everything from skilled to independent. And, I've raised this at the synodical level, and folks have been very, very supportive. But I just want to throw that out. And then the other thing from yesterday's discussion, if you all are feeling unloved, unwanted, one too many council meetings, come share ministry at Lowman. A lot of these folks, have real questions as, they're looking at the end of their time. So that can be very empowering. So just an open invitation and a bug in any.
Okay, Maria also serves as a hospice chaplain.
I've done that.
Okay.
She's down the hall.
Right.
The ELCA has been supportive of the Zion conferences, which are held every 3 years with these resident chaplains. But for some reason, there's some not connected into that program. They've been meeting for the last 50, 60 years.
So an organization called Zion,
Yes,
Pan
they used to
Lutheran.
meet in Zion, Illinois.
Okay.
And Surge, we had a person on staff, who oversaw the specialized ministry, and did the
See, that's
I've
what we,
only been doing this a dozen years, I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
so there's some networking there that can happen. So if we've overlooked the gifts of those serving in chaplaincy, then that's something we could take a look at in our publications. We have changed when you go on the website, that at least when we have at least the complexion of the pictures of folks, and so we are able to change. So the people who show up are not always people of color being the clients of white people or European Americans. So we can change things. We don't want to lose that. I know that Lowell Almond was a great supporter of military chaplaincy in particular. So I'll keep that in mind. But no, someone over here he had a hand up. You forget. Okay. Oh, you did. You, and then you. Go ahead.
Another different question. There was a letter that a congregational pastor shared with me about an invitation to congregations to discuss whether or not baptism.
There we go, Scott. We were trying to. The conversation is about all of us as the church, once again, studying this document, the use of the means of grace. It is not supposed to be a discussion about redoing this or saying you don't ever need to be baptized in order to receive communion. But that's was your question on this topic?
Mine was about chaplaincy.
Okay, we'll do chaplaincy and then get back to this because it's pretty big. Go ahead.
One of the things that makes chaplaincy challenging is the way you get into it. The way the candidacy process works for it, which I'm sure you're aware, is that you have to serve 3 years in a parish in order to be ordained or called as a chaplain. One of the things that I ran into at one point when I was discerning what I was supposed to be doing was that there are a lot of people who are called to be chaplains who wouldn't necessarily make good parish pastors. In the same way, there's a lot of parish pastors who wouldn't make good chaplains. They're both word and sacrament, but they're very specific, very different calls. Is there a way, as we've had the conversation about what to do with the lay rosters and things like that, is there a way that we can somehow address, the types of word and sacrament ministry that there are?
Well, we are already, we've changed that requirement in specific cases. So it used to be you were ordained and then you spent 3 years in a congregation before you would do any specialized ministry. That's how it was when I went through. But now we're seeing that we can identify people already who have the gifts for mission developers. So instead of them being ordained, spending 3 years in a not mission development congregation and then being a mission developer, they're already identified saying that when you're ready for call, you can be called as the mission developer of a new start, or I don't know if it's renewals as well. And in fact, there are Fund for Leaders scholarships set aside for people in that category. We also realize that some people feel called to military chaplaincy. And so they are not required to spend 3 years in a parish setting before going to military chaplaincy. They can be called to that, and their first call is as a military chaplain. And we have a Fund for Leaders scholarship for people who are called to that. Now, other kinds of chaplaincy, I think we're still talking to. Have you talked to Greg? You don't know. Your music, okay, and worship, which is great. So we're taking a look at that because that's been something that we need to. I mean, the parish is where most people are. Well, most people claim to be on Sundays. So, and that's where that is our basic ministry in the church, and you can learn a lot. But are we being too rigid by saying it has to be this and nothing else? Yes, chaplain.
I'm not the smartest knife in the jar, drawer, or whatever, but when I became a military chaplain, I had the 3 years of parish experience. I had no idea I was going to be a military chaplain. It just kind of happened. But I would have been lost in space if I'd have gone straight into military chaplaincy without having parish experience. And then when I finally got to the point where I got to supervise people, I supervised people from other denominations that didn't have that requirement to be parish pastors first. Not a good idea unless the person has a really, really special reason, need, or skill set to do that.
Well, we're very careful when we say to grant these exceptions to the 3-year parish rule. And we think, because then, yeah, you learn a lot in the parish. Yes, back here, there's a hand up before we go to the word. you hear that?
I was just resting my arm.
Oh, okay. Sure. Go ahead, Shane. Yeah, because you probably get tired of sitting. So I'll try to tackle this. Okay, so the Northern Illinois Synod sent a memorial to the Churchwide Assembly in 2013, and they referenced the variety of practices in their own synod about who is invited to the table. And they take a look at the things we put in our bulletins and the things we say. The things we say don't always match what we put in our bulletins either. And so that came forward the Churchwide Assembly, and the decision was then to refer this to the Church Council. And the Church Council said the way we're going to get an understanding about, take a look at what the Northern Illinois folks are talking about, is to invite the church again to read this document, The Use of the Means of Grace, which has our sacramental practice is in here. And it's been framed by some as a question of radical hospitality. And you know what, we'll put the Synod Assembly a rule in. You don't get to hiss or cheer for either side, because brothers and sisters on not agreeing with you might, Jesus died for them too. When you frame it as radical hospitality, right there, for me, there are a couple of problems. One that means if you don't say, y'all come, then you're not hospitable. The second thing, I don't think that this is an issue of hospitality. The sacraments, that's not what we're talking about, but we haven't had a conversation about this, or we haven't really delved or really reintroduced ourselves to how we understand sacramental practice in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And my guess is some of our own folks really don't know what we say or teach about baptism or Holy Communion. And there's probably still a lot of people who want to get their baby done because otherwise they're going to burn in hell for the rest of eternity. Though I think unbaptized children in that system went into limbo. And then people like Plato and Aristotle were also there. So it's like really high-class daycare for them. That was some of the medieval understandings of that. Or we have folks who don't understand that we believe that Jesus is present in, with, and under the forms of the bread and wine, a real presence. I'm sure there are a lot of folks who don't understand that. So just to get there, but then what is baptism about? What forms the Christian community? How, and then as a community then, how are we nourished? What does this mean? So that's what we want people to do when we're looking at this. Go ahead.
I wanted to know where it came from.
Northern Illinois, blame them.
I love rock, so I know where I'm...
Well, and it came from the Churchwide Assembly, which is all of us, and then from the Church Council, which is also all of us. Yeah.
That was a good background.
Well, and it's really, I'm already getting pounded on both sides, where I'm throwing away all of Christian tradition by encouraging people. In fact, the decision has already been made, we've been told, which is good. They don't have to go to work anymore. So the decision's already been made that we're just going to say, I'll come, and baptism is never anything we would talk about, just everyone comes for communion. And so we're terrible on that side. Or the decision has been made already that we're just going to do it the way we always have without any discussion. We're studying this together, and it came from the Churchwide Assembly through the Church Council. How did I do, Scott? Was I pretty good? Yes? Oh, thank the Lord. Brother Yost. Come on.
I would love for you to share what you hope will come out of this study of the means of grace. You convened it, you sent a letter out saying, I encourage you in your congregations. What is your hope that will come out of us together, renewing and reviewing our sacramental theology and our sacramental...
That's exactly what I hope would come out of this. That we would go deeply into this and understand who we are as church. This is part of We Are Church, and how we understand these sacraments and the gift that they are to our life together. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm not looking for a revision of this document, or I have no control over that. Here's a dirty little secret. I have no control over anything.
At the Conference of Bishops, you said, I have no intentions of us taking a vote on Holy Communion.
No, I don't want us to vote. I don't want to get to a church level.
I think that's a powerful statement. My intentions is not somehow we're going to all take a vote on Holy Communion practices and come to some kind of agreement, which would be devastating and only further divide us. So that was a very comforting word for a meeting here.
Right.
And but I really think it's a call to understand our own sacramental theology in a deeper way, which means going deeper into our discipleship practices that shape and form us and help helping our communities understand them so we live out together the gospel more faithfully.
Yes. And you just don't vote on community. You just don't. So, okay, so let me see, who has never had said anything yet? You have not had a chance to say anything.
Yeah, one of the things that, I've been out of seminary 5 years now, and in that time, since I started seminary, I think we've had roughly 3 faculties in Southern. And I'm curious what you think is the future of theological education in America, in the ELCA, I don't know, whatever you want to answer.
Well, we have something called the Theological Education Advisory Council, which your bishop co-chairs, that's taking a look at all, not just seminary theological education, but theological education across the church. And let me see if I have in my thousands of papers here. We just had an interim report. They won't finish their work until November of 2015. It comes to the church council. I'll let your bishop chime in because he's been working on this. But okay, what we're thinking, what we like. Anyways, we want to strengthen and improve and encourage theological education for everybody. Which would be more robust first call theological education for those who are on our rosters for public servants, ministry folks. It's true, you can walk into a lot of pastors, it's pastors mostly who do this, offices, and you can tell when we graduated from seminary by what books are on the shelf. Or that we have books on the shelf. That that'll date us that way too. And then, if we talk about being a priesthood of all the believers, how are we going about equipping the saints for the building up of the body of Christ? So what can we learn about theological education, and how do we deliver that more broadly to all the people of God? We're also taking a look at how are we more flexible in the way that we do form leaders for public ministry. How can we take a look at the residential requirements for seminaries, or distributive or distance learning, or theological education in emerging ministries, team candidates? In fact, the new bishop in Northeastern Ohio was a team candidate, was ordained through that. So, you associates of ministry think that you're the stepchildren of chaplains. There is a real prejudice against teen pastors. And my experience was with the folks with whom I served. They were some of the finest pastors we had. But their brother and sister clergy, mostly brother clergy, would say, "Oh, you're just playing pastor." So we can't do that anymore. So we're taking a look at that, and we're taking a look at the viability of our seminaries. So, Herman, do you want to chime in some more?
You did a great job.
Oh,
With the viability of seminaries,
yes,
instead of saying which one gets booted off the island, and that was part of our chart. You figure out which Lutherans haven't been able to figure out the whole time. What we've done is we've developed a comprehensive scorecard for every seminary to see where its growing areas are, with the challenge that you need to address where your particular weaknesses are and come up with a plan. And we're exploring what might that look like if seminaries don't adequately address what their deficiencies are, because that's sustainability. And if seminaries continue to find that they're not able to be sustainable, then that becomes a way that seminaries will figure out what they need to do to offer the seminaries, offer to the community at large. So these scorecards are an attempt to hold our system across the board accountable. The other thing we're trying to say is, what are the strengths that the different seminaries bring, so we can build those seminaries, and every seminary, just like every congregation, doesn't have to do everything the same way. So how do we network? How do we learn? How do we practice distributive learning? Every seminary does not need to have a Latino course in how to be a pastor. But if a couple of them have it, then how can we learn from those that are doing it well, so that we in South Carolina, who need more Latino pastors raised up, can take advantage of it?
And how do we share faculty?
So we're trying to figure that out, as well as just trying to broaden lay schools, lay theological training. So it's an exciting time. I think it's a great time to be recruiting people for word and sacrament and word and service ministry, because I've never seen such flexibility at this moment. There's a lot of different options. And we're studying which experiments are working well. It's maybe having 1 year as a resident and 2 years working in a congregation and still continuing theological education. That model's being tried.
At Trinity, it's a 2 and 2. So
2 and 2.
It's like a medical school model. So 2 years of intensive.
We're really trying to figure this out in some new ways to adapt to the changing world we're living in.
Yeah. So 2 years is intensive academic work, and then 2 years in an internship. But you would also be receiving, so like doing clinicals, a clinical rotation. Luther has a very robust distributive learning thing where you're accepted into that. It's not like you can come in and out, you're accepted as part of that, that cohort. And they do, so we've got a student in Turkey who's part of that cohort. Then they come on campus a couple of times a year. So we're trying these different experiments. So we want to be, the ELCA needs a theological education network that is more far-reaching, that's more connected and physical, and it's more sustainable. Because the model that we have now, if we were to do this, none of our seminaries would survive. I think Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary would hold out the longest, but none of the rest of them can survive. If the model's built on getting MDiv students in, it's not going to happen. So that's what we're looking at. Okay, now, let me see here and then here. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Along the lines of theological education, with numbers being what they are, shrinking, and thinking about missional church, emergent church, do we have any thoughts? Do you have any thoughts about how we might train bivocational pastors?
We're doing that now.
And how that would be?
No, we're doing that now, and we're going to have to take a look at, some of it has to do with the Board of Pensions, or I mean Portico, but some of it has to do with constitutional requirements and for rostering. So maybe we're going to have to say there's not going to be a per-hour week requirement to be considered someone eligible for ordination or to be considered on the roster. We're looking at, a lot of folks are bivocational now. A lot of folks serve multiple points. Parish, yeah, you work at Lowe's, so you know what it is. So we do that, and we're telling people that this should be considered an option. How do we look at non-stipendiary folks who maybe, because we don't know what to do with those people, they have to have a call through the Synod Council in order to do it. It can't be a first call person. No, it can be, but it's a rare occasion. So we have associate ministry who's a spiritual director who's called through one of our Synod councils to serve the Synod. So we're going to have to take a look at that because that's the reality. And how then, as we're taking a look at our companions in the Global South, how do we equip in a rigorous way lay people to be doing catechesis and evangelism? I think it's in Indonesia, in one of the Lutheran churches in Indonesia, they have 4 orders of ministry. So they have bishops and pastors and deacons and teachers, and they're ordained to being a teacher. So what can we learn from them? The church is growing there, and there are more Lutherans in Indonesia than there are here, which is stunning. So here, did we have any? 2-minute warning.
Okay, I was just going to say something quick about use of means of grace.
Okay, go ahead.
When I arrived at my first call, there were different communion practices, such as the pastor was the only one who could touch anything. And so we were looking at Romans and Bible studies, and after that, we're going to look at the use of the means of grace. So that the congregation didn't think that I made this all up. So it's a very useful document for that, for going over and just re-grounding.
And one of the geniuses of this, besides it's so beautifully written, is that it does allow for the possibility of flexibility in this. I mean, not just wholesale, do whatever you want, but it talks, it gives this is how it's usually done, but we recognize in some places it might not be, but this is how we've organized ourselves. So yeah, no, okay, and then here, yes please.
A lot of us got our calls as second or even third career people. And one of the things that I felt, and I don't know if others did, I can only speak for myself, was that we brought to the church a lot of gifts and a lot of experience. And it was you were almost encouraged to put all that away if you were going to have a quote pastoral identity. And I think the church is missing a lot of gifts that could be used with that approach. The sense that if you were really going to be a pastor, none of that other stuff had any impact on it, which of course is wrong.
Well, of course it did, and we all come with previous experiences, whether it's been in the workforce or just in life. That's not an official. Maybe I don't know what seminary you went to, or if that was it.